Ever felt like your teaching methods were putting even you to sleep? Discover how I turned my classroom from a snooze fest to a powerhouse of engagement and excitement with one game-changing strategy. My name is Scott, and you're watching Immediate Immersion, where we're all about comprehension-based instruction in the modern language classroom. We'll be right back. When I started teaching in 2001, I didn't have any clue what I was doing. I started teaching on an emergency permit with no formal training. I hadn't even started teacher school yet. I relied on the textbook and what my teachers did when I was in high school, and it was an absolute disaster. The textbook we were using at the time was called Yavidas, and I was using that teaching the chapters through the instructions in the teacher's manual, and I tried to make it work. But my kids were bored. And not only were my students bored, but I was bored as well. And I knew that I couldn't keep doing this for the next 20 or 30 years without some kind of a change. So I realized what I was doing was failing. And so I was looking for something that can actually engage my students. So during winter break that year, I searched and I stumbled upon Blaine Ray and Tprs. At the time, it was called TPR storytelling, but then we actually changed the acronym to actually reflect what we actually were doing in classes, which was teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling. And this discovery changed everything for me. Even my principal said that there is a huge difference between first semester and my second semester of teaching. And remember, I still haven't started teaching school. I didn't start teaching school to my second year of teaching. And he told me if I hadn't made that change, that I probably would not have been rehired at the end of that first year. Now, he didn't tell me I needed to make the change. It was something that I saw within myself. So without any formal training, I purchased all the TPRS books that I could find and started using this method in second semester. At the time, we didn't have Facebook groups. We had a Yahoo group called More TPRS that I followed religiously to try to learn how to implement this method, because the first time I could get any formal training wasn't until that summer, and I needed to make the change now. And my first attempts at TPRS were awkward. I scripted everything, every sentence, and I didn't let my students change much, if anything. I read from these stories word for word and only allowed my students to change minor details like color of hair, the names of them, where they lived. But despite my inexperience, the engagement was night and day compared to before. Students were suddenly interested and involved, and my principal noticed this dramatic improvement. And my kids were engaged, and they were learning, and there were smiles on their face. And best of all of us were able to stay awake for the entire class period. The first strategy is scripting engaging stories. Crafting stories with room for student input makes the learning process interactive and fun. It's less about perfect scripting and more about engagement. So start with a simple story outline related to whatever you're teaching, the vocabulary and the structures that you're trying to teach. And use leading questions during class time to allow students to contribute details to make the story their own. We call this story asking because it's a collaborative event and it's all about the students. If we actually story tell instead of story ask, then it's my story and it's not a collaborative event. And this not only engages them, but also reinforces vocabulary and structures. And this way, with the same story outline, you can teach it to all of your classes, but come with a different story each and every time. And you don't have to worry about remembering all the details from story to story. I used to stress about that, but you don't have to worry about that at all because your students will remember them for you, and it's a great way for formative assessment. I used to script out the vacation chapter of Yavidas, teaching words like seagull and seaweed when I first started. And despite this awkwardness, the engagement was unprecedented. they still were able to engage themselves in the story, and we had fun and learned a lot. During that first summer after my first year of teaching, I attended a Blaine Ray workshop with Susie Gross in Orange County, California, and the experience was transformative. Armed with my new knowledge that I learned in that training, I returned to my classroom and saw immediate improvements. Students began writing stories of 100 to 200 words in level 1, using the language naturally. And both parents and students were thrilled with the progress, making me even more committed to this method. Strategy number 2, encourage student-created content. When students create their own stories, they take ownership of their learning and they're actually applying what they learned in new context. And this leads to higher motivation and retention. And when they feel success, their confidence is boosted and their affective filter is reduced. So introduce story creation activities where students write and share their own narratives. One of the ways I do this is with weekly quick writes. Starting in level 1, in their 3rd month of instruction, I'll start having them write weekly quick writes each week where they can write about whatever they want using the structures and vocabulary that we're working on. In levels 2, 3, and above, they start that very first week of school so I can get a real gauge to them and they get regular practice output, at least in a written form. You want to provide prompts and structure initially, but gradually give them much more freedom. And as I became more comfortable with TPRS, I let go of the need to script everything. Students' creativity flourished and their language skills soared because I worked with just a simple script that allowed for a lot of opportunities for student input. And that's where the engagement really skyrocketed. One of the things that I learned that second year was trusting the process. As a personal control freak, it was terrifying to me to give students more autonomy during that story phase, but it was absolutely necessary for true engagement. With time, I became more comfortable with this approach, and it was less work for me and more empowering for my students. In 2007, I attended my first national NTPRS conference in Denver. And by 2008, I was invited to present, sharing my journey and strategies with others. It was a great experience for me, even though I was very nervous in presenting to my peers. But since then, I have grown and been able to share with you all of my experiences to help all of us grow together. Kickstart your school year with confidence. Ever feel overwhelmed by the start of a new school year? I used to all of the time. But our back to school bootcamp is here to change that. Register now at mm.us/bootcamp and learn how to create a well-organized, engaging classroom environment. From setting up your classroom to conducting impactful back-to-school nights, we've got the tips and strategies you need. Imagine a school year where you're confident, prepared, and ready to inspire. Don't miss out. Register now and start your journey to a successful school year today. Here we are at our 3rd and final strategy for today, using high-frequency vocabulary. Focusing on high-frequency vocabulary ensures students are learning words and phrases that they'll use frequently, making the language more relevant and useful. And what's great about using high-frequency vocabulary is you don't have to try very hard. If you're using the language consistency in class, you're naturally using high-frequency vocabulary because by its very nature, it's high frequency. You can't get away from using it. But you want to make sure that you prioritize this high-frequency vocabulary in your stories and activities. I start with Dr. Terry Waltz's Super 7, and I increase to Mike Peto's Sweet 16. These 16 key verbs really help my students build their confidence in the language as they master them in past, present, and future. You can use other resources like frequency dictionaries that you can find on Amazon to help guide your planning. And when I started to shift my focus from those low frequency words you find in the textbook like seagull, paperclip, and seaweed to a more common vocabulary, made a significant difference in my students' practical language use. They were actually learning vocabulary that they could actually use in real life, and that boosted their confidence in the language. By sharing my journey from traditional to transformative teaching, I hope to inspire you to embrace change and discover the incredible impact of TPRS and CI. Implement these strategies today and watch your classroom come alive with engagement and authentic language use. Thanks for watching. And if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more tips on transforming your teaching. Check out one of the videos YouTube has picked out for you to keep learning. Happy comprehensible input!